The stars were going out one by one. Nobody knew why. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the Liberty's Edge, watching the emergency message play for the third time. The blue-skinned woman on the screen looked tired and scared, which was strange because Admiral Kira Veltar never showed fear. She had led the Galactic Federation for over 200 years, and Jake had never seen her look anything but calm and in control. "All ships, this is Admiral Veltar speaking. From Centauri Prime," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "We have a crisis unlike anything we have faced before. The stellar conduits are failing across the galaxy. Entire star systems are losing power and going dark. We need all available ships to help with evacuations." Jake turned off the message and looked at his crew. Dr. Lisa Park, the ship's science officer, was studying her tablet with a worried expression. She was one of the smartest people Jake knew, an expert on ancient alien civilizations who had helped solve mysteries that had puzzled scientists for decades. "How bad is it, Doc?" Jake asked. Lisa looked up from her tablet. "Bad. Really bad. The conduits have powered our civilizations for 3,000 years. Without them, entire worlds will freeze in the dark. But that's not the worst part." "What's the worst part?" "The failures aren't random. Something is destroying them on purpose, and it's doing it from the inside." Lieutenant Commander Tony Rodriguez, Jake's second-in-command, stepped forward. "From the inside? How is that possible?" Lisa shook her head. "I don't know. The energy readings are unlike anything we've seen before. It's almost like the conduits are being eaten by something that shouldn't exist." Jake had seen a lot of strange things in his 20 years of space travel, but this was different. The stellar conduits were more than just power sources. They were the highways that connected the galaxy, allowing ships to travel faster than light and keeping billions of worlds in contact with each other. Without them, the galaxy would become a collection of isolated islands in the dark. "Set course for the nearest failing system," Jake ordered. "Maybe we can figure out what's happening." The Liberty's Edge jumped to hyperspace, traveling through the conduit network toward the Proxima system. As they flew, Jake thought about Earth and the message he had received from home that morning. President Alex Carter had called an emergency meeting of the Global Defense Council, Sol Conduit, which powered Earth's colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter, was showing the same warning signs as the ones that had already failed. When they dropped out of hyperspace near Proxima Centauri, Jake felt his heart sink. The system that should have been bright with the light of 3 billion people was almost completely dark. Only emergency lights flickered on the space stations. And the massive conduit structure that had once glowed like a small star was cold and dead. "My God," Lisa whispered. "We're too late." Jake ordered his crew to scan for survivors. They found thousands of people trapped on stations with failing life support and dozens of ships stranded without power. The Liberty's Edge worked for hours, ferrying people to safety and distributing emergency supplies. But with every person they saved, Jake knew they were losing the bigger battle. Dr. Park led a team to the central conduit station to look for clues. What she found there made her call Jake immediately. "Captain, you need to see this," she said over the radio. "We found something in the conduit core. It's not from any species we know." Jake took a shuttle to the station and met Lisa in the central chamber. The room was enormous, filled with crystal formations that had once channeled energy across the galaxy. Now they were cracked and blackened, as if they had been burned from within. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to a section of damaged crystal. "These marks aren't from an explosion or weapon. Something was inside the conduit feeding on it." Jake examined the crystal. The damage looked almost organic, like bite marks. From some impossible creature. What could do this? "I don't know, but I found something else." Lisa led him to a computer terminal that was still working. The station's records showed that the attack came from within the conduit network itself. Whatever did this traveled through the energy streams and struck from inside. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. If the enemy could move through the conduits, then nowhere in the galaxy was safe. Every world connected to the network was vulnerable. His radio crackled to life. It was Tony Rodriguez who had stayed on the Liberty's Edge to coordinate rescue operations. "Captain, we're getting reports from across the galaxy. 3 more systems just went dark, and the pattern is accelerating. Admiral Veltar is calling for all human ships to return to Earth immediately. Jake looked at the destroyed conduit station around him. 3 billion people had lived in this system yesterday. Today, most of them were dead or dying in the cold darkness of space. The lucky ones had been evacuated to other worlds, but how long before those worlds suffered the same fate? "Tony, get me a secure channel to Admiral Brooks on Earth," Jake said. Admiral Helen Brooks was the head of Earth's Space Navy, one of the few people Jake trusted completely. The connection took several minutes to establish, but eventually, Brooks' familiar face appeared on Jake's portable screen. She looked as worried as Jake felt. "Captain Morrison, I was hoping you'd call. We need to talk, Admiral. I think we're looking at the end of galactic civilization. This isn't just an attack, it's an extermination." Brooks nodded grimly. "Our scientists agree. But we might have found something. Dr. Ben Cole's team has been studying the energy signatures from the failed conduits. They think the attackers aren't from our dimension." "What do you mean? They're made of dark matter, or something like it? Exist in the spaces between normal matter, which is why they can move through the conduits without being detected. Ben thinks they've been trapped in the network for thousands of years, and now they're breaking free." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air of the damaged station. "How do we fight something made of dark matter?" "We don't know yet. But Ben thinks humans might be different somehow. We're the only species that seems able to sense these things directly. All the other races need instruments to detect them, but some of our people can feel them coming." As if to prove her point, Jake suddenly felt a strange sensation, like ice water flowing through his veins. He looked around the station and saw that the remaining crystal formations were beginning to flicker with dark energy. "Admiral, I think we're about to have visitors," he said, drawing his weapon, even though he knew it would be useless. The temperature in the station dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The lights began to fail one by one, and in the growing darkness, Jake saw shapes moving. They looked like holes in reality itself, patches of absolute darkness that hurt to look at directly. "Everyone back to the shuttle now," shouted. His team ran for the exit. Jake stayed behind to cover their retreat. One of the shadow creatures moved toward him, and he felt his mind fill with whispers in a language that predated human civilization. The whispers spoke of the end of all light, the return of the eternal dark, the joy of watching civilizations die. Jake fired his weapon at the creature, and to his surprise, it actually seemed to hurt it. The shadow writhed and pulled back, giving him time to reach the shuttle. As they fled the dying station, Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. "Captain, whatever those things are, they're not just destroying the conduits. They're using them to spread across the galaxy like an infection." Jake looked back at Proxima Centauri, where the last lights were flickering out. Soon, every star in the galaxy might go dark. But somehow, humans could fight these creatures. He didn't know how or why, but it was the only hope they had. "Set course for Earth," he ordered. "It's time to find out what makes us so special." The ancient data core was covered in dust and looked like it had been forgotten for thousands of years. Lieutenant Commander Tony Rodriguez carefully lifted it from the wreckage of the Proxima station, wondering how something so small could hold secrets that might save the galaxy. "Be careful with that," Dr. Lisa Parks said as they carried it back to the Liberty's edge. "The energy readings are off the charts. This thing is older than the Federation itself." Captain Jake Morrison watched from the bridge as his team brought the artifact aboard. 3 days had passed since they escaped the shadow creatures at Proxima, and the news from across the galaxy kept getting worse. 12 more star systems had gone dark, and the pattern was spreading faster than anyone had predicted. "Any luck with the translation?" Jake asked as Lisa connected the data core to the ship's computers. "Some of it is in languages I recognize, but most of it is completely alien. Give me a few more hours." Lisa's fingers flew across her keyboard as streams of unknown symbols filled her screens. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Dr. Ben Cole was having his own breakthrough. The head of Earth's advanced physics department had been working around the clock with his team, trying to understand the dark matter creatures that were destroying the conduits. Admiral Brooks, you need to see this, Ben said as he called the head of Earth's Space Navy. His laboratory was filled with holographic displays showing energy patterns that looked more like living things than scientific data. Admiral Helen Brooks arrived within the hour, bringing with her President Alex Carter and several other government officials. They all looked tired and worried, which was understandable since Earth's own conduit was showing signs of the same infection that had destroyed the others. "What have you found, Doctor?" President Carter asked. Ben pointed to his largest hologram, which showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with red spots marking the failed conduits. "The creatures aren't random attackers. They're prisoners, and they've been locked up for a very long time." "Prisoners?" Admiral Brooks asked. "Who could imprison things made of dark matter?" "That's the interesting part. Our computers have been analyzing the energy signatures from the attacks, and we found something amazing. The conduits weren't just built to carry power and allow faster-than-light travel. They were built as a prison." President Carter stared at the hologram. "A prison big enough to hold the entire galaxy." "Exactly. Someone built the conduit network thousands of years ago specifically to trap these dark matter entities, but after 3,000 years of constant use, the prison walls are breaking down." Back on the Liberty's edge, Dr. Park was making her own disturbing discovery. The ancient data core had finally revealed its secrets, and what she found made her hands shake as she called Captain Morrison to her laboratory. "Jake, you need to sit down for this," she said when he arrived. "That bad?" "Worse. The data core contains the complete history of a war that happened long before any of our civilizations existed. The people who built the conduits called themselves the Architects, and they fought a war against these shadow creatures for over 1,000 years. Jake sat down heavily in a chair. "Did they win?" "Yes and no. They won the war by building the conduit network as a massive trap. They lured all the shadow creatures into the energy streams and then locked them inside. But the cost was enormous. The Architects had to abandon this entire galaxy to make sure the prison would hold." Lisa brought up a holographic display showing strange beings that looked almost human, but with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed with inner light. "These are the Architects. According to their records, they were the most advanced civilization this galaxy had ever seen. They could manipulate matter and energy with their minds, travel between dimensions, and build technology that was indistinguishable from magic. What happened to them? Most of them left for another galaxy, but some stayed behind to guard the prison and make sure it never failed." Lisa paused, looking uncomfortable. "Jake, there's something else. The records mention a small group of Architects who volunteered to have their memories erased and their abilities locked away. They were supposed to live normal lives and reproduce, creating a population that could activate the emergency protocols if the prison ever failed." Jake felt a cold sensation in his stomach. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "The genetic markers match perfectly. Humans aren't native to this galaxy, Jake. We're the descendants of the Architects who stayed behind. Our abilities have been sleeping in our DNA for thousands of years, waiting for this moment." The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. Everything humans thought they knew about their origins was wrong. So they weren't a young species that had recently discovered space travel. They were the children of the galaxy's most advanced civilization, and they had been bred specifically to fight these shadow creatures. "That's why some humans can sense the creatures directly," Lisa continued. "It's why your weapon actually hurt. That shadow thing at Proxima. You have dormant abilities that the other galactic species don't possess." Jake's radio crackled to life. It was Tony Rodriguez calling from the bridge. "Captain, we're receiving a priority message from Earth. Doctor, Cole says he's found something important." When Jake reached the bridge, Ben Cole's worried face filled the main screen. Behind him, Jake could see Admiral Brooks and President Carter. "Captain Morrison, Dr. Park's discovery confirms what we suspected. Escaping from the conduits, they're converting the entire network into something else. Every conduit they infect becomes a doorway that allows more of them to enter our dimension." "How much time do we have?" Jake asked. "At the current rate of infection, maybe 6 months before every conduit in the galaxy is compromised. They'll have enough power to manifest physical forms and attack planets directly." Dr. Park stepped forward. There might be a way to stop them, but it's dangerous. The architect records mention something called the Nexus Core, a central control system that can purge the entire network at once. Where is it? That's the problem. It's located at the galaxy's edge, in a star system that died long ago. Even if we could find it, getting there would mean traveling through infected conduits that are crawling with shadow creatures. President Carter's voice came through the speaker. Captain Morrison, I'm authorizing you to attempt this mission. We'll provide whatever support we can, but most of our fleet needs to stay here to defend our home system. Admiral Brooks added, We're also beginning something called the Awakening Protocol. Dr. Cole believes he can activate the dormant architect abilities in volunteers, but the process is extremely dangerous. We've lost 3 test subjects already. Jake looked around at his crew. They all knew what this meant. They would be flying into the heart of enemy territory with no backup and little chance of survival. But if they didn't try, the entire galaxy would fall to darkness. We'll need more information about the Nexus Core, Jake said. And we'll need volunteers for this awakening protocol. If we're really descendants of the architects, then it's time to reclaim our birthright. Lisa nodded grimly. I've been studying the architect genetic modification techniques. The process involves rewriting DNA at the quantum level. It's not just dangerous, it's agony. But those who survive will be able to see and manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. How many volunteers do we need? For this mission, at least 20 enhanced humans? But Jake, even if the process works perfectly, we're talking about turning people into something that's barely human anymore. Jake thought about the billions of people who had already died in the failing star systems. He thought about Earth's children playing under a sun that might go dark within months. He thought about the shadow creatures and their whispers of eternal darkness. Put out the call for volunteers, he said. It's time to wake up and remember who we really are. As the Liberty's Edge changed course toward the galaxy's edge, Jake wondered if humanity was ready to become something more than human. The architects had built them to be weapons against the darkness, but weapons were meant to be used. The question was whether they would survive the transformation, and whether anything recognizably human would remain when it was over. The galaxy was failing, but Earth's children were finally ready to answer their true calling. The screaming lasted for 3 hours. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell lay strapped to the medical table as Dr. Ben Cole's machines rewrote her DNA 1 gene at a time. She was the first volunteer for the Awakening Protocol, and everyone on Earth was. Watching to see if she would live or die, Captain Jake Morrison stood outside the medical bay on Earth's orbital station, listening to Sarah's cries through the thick walls. 23 other volunteers waited in the next room, knowing they might be next to endure the same agony. The pain is necessary, Dr. Cole explained to Jake. We're not just changing her body. We're unlocking parts of her brain that have been dormant for thousands of years. Her nervous system is literally rebuilding itself to handle abilities that no human has used since the architect era. Through the observation window, Jake watched as Sarah's body glowed with strange energy. Her hair turned white, her eyes began to shine with blue light, and her skin seemed to shimmer like it was made of starlight. Then suddenly, the screaming stopped. Sarah opened her eyes and sat up on the table. But when she looked at Jake, he knew immediately that something fundamental had changed. Her gaze seemed to see through him, around him, and into dimensions that normal humans couldn't perceive. I can see them, she whispered. The shadow creatures. They're everywhere, hiding in the spaces between atoms. And I can see the conduits too. They're alive, Jake. The entire network is like a giant living thing, and it's sick. Dr. Cole ran his instruments over Sarah, checking her vital signs. Her brain activity is off the charts. She's processing information at speeds that should be impossible for human neural tissue. Sarah stood up from the table, moving with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. The conduits aren't just carrying energy, they're carrying consciousness. Every time someone uses the network to travel or communicate, they leave a tiny piece of their mind behind. After 3,000 years, the network has become a collective intelligence. The shadow creatures are infecting it, Jake said. Infecting, converting. They're turning the network's consciousness into something like themselves. If they succeed, every planet connected to the conduits will become a gateway for more creatures from dark space. Over the next week, 19 more volunteers survived the awakening protocol. 5 died during the process, their bodies unable to handle the transformation. The survivors became something beyond normal human understanding, but they retained their memories and personalities. Dr. Lisa Park was among the volunteers. When she emerged from the process, her archaeological knowledge had expanded to include information she had never learned. She could read architect texts as easily as English, and she understood the technology that had created the conduit network. The Nexus Core isn't just a control system, she told Jake as they prepared for their mission. It's the heart of the network's consciousness. If we can reach it and remove the shadow infection, we can save not just the conduits but every mind that has ever touched the network. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the crisis was getting worse. Admiral Kira Veltar sent desperate messages from the remaining Federation worlds. The proud Zephyrian Empire, which had ruled 1,000 star systems, was down to just 3 planets with working conduits. The crystalline resonance, beings made of pure energy who lived inside the conduits themselves, were dying as the shadow creatures consumed their home. "We're running out of time," Admiral Helen Brooks told Jake during their final briefing. "Our long-range sensors show that the infection is accelerating. We estimate maybe 2 months before the entire network falls." Jake looked at his transformed crew. Zara Mitchell had become their navigator, able to see the hidden pathways through the conduit network. Tony Rodriguez had volunteered for the process and could now sense the shadow creatures from incredible distances. Lisa Park could interface directly with architect technology using only her mind. 20 enhanced humans against an enemy that has destroyed civilizations, Jake said. "I like our odds." The journey to the galaxy's edge took them through conduits that were actively being consumed by shadow creatures. Sarah guided the Liberty's Edge through quantum tunnels that existed between dimensions, avoiding the main pathways where the infection was strongest. "It's like swimming through someone's nightmare," she reported from the navigation station. The shadow creatures aren't just destroying the conduits. They're experiencing every memory and emotion that the network has ever carried, and they're enjoying the pain. Twice they were forced to fight manifestations of the creatures that appeared inside their ship. The enhanced humans discovered they could hurt the shadows with focused thought, turning their consciousness into weapons that could strike at beings made of dark matter. But each battle cost them. The strain of using their new abilities was enormous. And Jake watched his crew grow weaker with every encounter. They finally reached the Dead Star system at the galaxy's edge. After 2 weeks of dangerous travel, what they found there took their breath away. Surrounding a collapsed star was a ring structure so massive that entire planets could have fit inside its hollow sections. "That's it," Lisa said, her enhanced senses reading the ancient technology. The Nexus Core. The architects built it around a black hole to tap into the fundamental forces of space and time. As they approached the structure, Jake felt the presence of something vast and ancient stirring to life. The ring began to glow with patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. "We're being scanned," Sarah reported. "Something in there is deciding whether we're a friend or enemy." A voice spoke in their minds, using words in a language older than human civilization. But somehow, they all understood it perfectly. "I am Guardian Protocol 7, the voice said. "I have waited 4,000 years for the Architect's children to return. The prison is failing. The Void Hunters grow strong. Time grows short. We're here to fix the network," Jake said aloud. "Tell us what we need to do. The cure requires sacrifice. To purge the infection, living consciousness must burn itself out through the network. The volunteers will become part of the conduits. Forever, their life force cleansing the shadow from every pathway." Jake felt his heart sink. How many volunteers? All who have awakened, and many more. The network spans the galaxy. Each sector requires a guardian to burn away the darkness. Lisa stepped forward. "We understand. But first, we need to reach the core and start the process." The Guardian AI guided them into the ring structure, through passages that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. They fought their way past shadow creatures that had been trapped in the structure for millennia. Beings so ancient and powerful that they could manipulate reality with their presence, the final battle took place in the core chamber itself, a space that existed at the center of the black hole, where the laws of physics broke down completely. Jake and his team faced the Void Hunter's leader, a creature of such pure darkness that it seemed to absorb light from the surrounding stars. Tony Rodriguez died fighting the creature, his consciousness burning out as he struck it with all his ENHENCED power. Sarah Mitchell sacrificed herself to open the pathway to the core's controls. One by one, Jake's enhanced crew gave their lives to clear the way. Finally, Jake and Lisa stood before the core itself, a crystal formation that pulsed. With the heartbeat of the galaxy, through its faceted surface, Jake could see every world connected to the network, every civilization hanging in the balance. "Are you ready?" Lisa asked, her hand on the activation controls. Jake thought about Earth, about the children playing under the sun, about all the species across the galaxy who deserved a chance to live free from the darkness. "Send the signal," he said. "Let every human in the galaxy know that it's time to answer the call." As Lisa activated the core, Jake felt his consciousness expand to touch every conduit in the galaxy. Somewhere out there, thousands of enhanced humans were receiving the call to sacrifice themselves for strangers they would never meet. The galaxy was failing, but Earth's children were finally ready to save it. The message went out across the galaxy on every human communication channel. It was simple and direct, broadcast from the Nexus core to every enhanced human who had survived the Awakening Protocol. "This is Captain Jake Morrison. The time has come. We need you to save the galaxy." On Earth, President Alex Carter stood before the largest crowd ever assembled in human history. People filled the streets of every major city, watching giant screens that showed his face. Behind him stood the families of the enhanced humans who would soon give their lives for people they had never met. "My fellow humans," Carter began, his voice carrying to billions of people across Earth and its colonies. "Today we face a choice that will define our species forever. We can save the galaxy, but only at the cost of our best and brightest." They have volunteered to burn out their lives to cleanse the conduit network of the shadow infection. In the crowd, an old woman named Betty Collins held a picture of her grandson Peter. He had been among the first to volunteer for enhancement, and now he was somewhere in space, preparing to die for aliens he had never seen. She wiped tears from her eyes but did not look away from the screen. "These volunteers will become part of the conduit network itself," Carter continued. "Their consciousness will spread across the stars, touching every world and every life connected to the conduits. They will feel the joy of children playing on distant planets, the love of families separated by space but connected by the network, and the hopes and dreams of 1,000 different species." Dr. Ben Cole stood at his control station on Earth's orbital platform, watching as enhanced humans across the galaxy began the final process. His instruments showed energy readings that should have been impossible as human consciousness prepared to merge with technology that spanned entire star systems. "All stations report ready," he announced to Admiral Brooks. "The volunteers are in position across 73 sectors of the galaxy. When they begin the purification, the energy release will be visible from neighboring galaxies." Back at the Nexus core, Jake Morrison and Dr. Lisa Park stood before the massive crystal formation that controlled the entire conduit network. Through its glowing surface, they could see the volunteer humans scattered across the galaxy, each one preparing to sacrifice everything for the chance to save civilization. "I want you to know something," Jake said to Lisa as they prepared to begin. "When this is over, we won't be human anymore. We'll be something else, something that exists partly in the network and partly in normal space. Are you ready for that?" Lisa smiled sadly. "I've been studying dead civilizations my whole life. Maybe it's time to help create a living one." The purification began with Jake himself. As he placed his hands on the core's surface, he felt his consciousness expand beyond anything he had ever imagined. Suddenly, he could perceive every conduit in the galaxy, every world connected to the network, and every shadow creature that had infected the system. The pain was incredible. It felt like his mind was being torn apart and rebuilt on a scale that spanned star systems. But through the agony, he began to experience something wonderful. He felt the gratitude of a mother on a distant world as the lights came back on. In her child's room, he experienced the relief of rescue workers on a space station as their life support systems resumed working. He touched the minds of beings whose names he didn't know, but whose hopes he suddenly shared. Across the galaxy, other enhanced humans began their own sacrifices. Peter Collins, the young man whose grandmother waited on Earth, purified the entire Centauri sector. As his life force burned away, he felt the joy of millions of beings as their worlds emerged from darkness. His last thought was of his grandmother's face, and somehow he knew she would understand why he had to do this. Commander Maria Santos, who had commanded a research vessel before her enhancement, cleansed the core worlds of the former Federation as her consciousness merged with the conduits. She experienced the memories of every diplomatic meeting, every trade agreement, and every friendship that had been forged between different species. She died knowing that her sacrifice had preserved not just lives, but the bonds that held civilizations together. Dr. Robert Kim, physicist who had volunteered despite having 3 young children, purified the Outer Rim territories where the newest colonies struggled to survive. As he burned away the shadow infection, he felt the dreams of young beings who would now grow up under bright stars instead of dying in the cold darkness of space. One by one, the enhanced humans gave their lives. Each death sent a wave of cleansing energy through their assigned sector, burning away the shadow creatures and restoring the conduits to their original purpose. The network began to pulse with warm living energy instead of the cold hunger of the Void Hunters. On the bridge of Admiral Veltar's flagship, instruments suddenly blazed with readings they hadn't seen in months. Conduits throughout Federation space were not just working again, they were working better than ever before. Admiral, her communications officer, reported with wonder in his voice. "We're receiving messages from colonies we thought were lost. They're alive. The lights are coming back on across the entire sector." Veltar felt tears running down her blue cheeks. In her 200 years of life, she had never seen anything like the courage these humans had shown. They had saved her. People saved everyone, and most of them would never even be remembered by the beings they had died to protect. The Zephyrian Empire, reduced to 3 worlds just days before, suddenly found their entire territory restored to life. Emperor Thane, the proudest warrior in the galaxy, knelt in his throne room and spoke a prayer of gratitude to the human spirits who had saved his people. Even the crystalline resonance, beings of pure energy who lived within the conduits themselves, felt the change. The network that had become a place of death and shadow was suddenly filled with warmth and protection. They sang in harmonies that had been silent for months, their joy echoing through the quantum pathways. But the greatest change was in the network itself. The consciousness that had been infected and corrupted by the Void Hunters was now guided by human souls who had chosen love over fear, sacrifice over survival. The conduits became more than just highways for energy and communication. They became a living testament to the best of what thinking beings could achieve at the Nexus core. Jake felt his individual consciousness fading as he became part of something immeasurably larger. But he wasn't disappearing. He was becoming more than he had ever been. His awareness spread through the network, touching every world, every ship, every being that used the conduits. Lisa completed her own sacrifice moments later, her archaeological knowledge becoming part of the network's memory.
Wow.
Every species connected to the conduits would have access to the history and wisdom of civilizations that had existed long before their own. As the purification wave completed its journey across the galaxy, the last of the shadow creatures were burned away. The Void Hunters, beings that had terrorized civilizations for millions of years, were finally destroyed. But in their place was something new, something that had never existed before in the galaxy's history. The conduit network was no longer just a tool. It was a guardian, protected by the spirits of humans who had chosen to become something greater than themselves. Every world connected to the network was now watched over by beings who understood the value of life, the importance of hope, and the power of sacrifice. The galaxy had been failing, but Earth had answered the call. And in answering, humanity had become the guardians of all life among the stars. 5 years had passed since the Great Purification, and the galaxy was a different place. Captain Jake Morrison materialized on the bridge of the Liberty's Edge, his form flickering between solid matter and pure energy. He was no longer entirely human, existing as both a physical being and a consciousness spread throughout the conduit network. When he walked, starlight seemed to follow in his footsteps. "Status report," he said to the new crew that had taken over his old ship were young humans born after the crisis who looked at him with a mixture of awe and respect. "All sectors are functioning perfectly," Guardian Prime, Lieutenant Danny Walsh reported. Danny was the son of one of the volunteers who had died in the purification, and he wore his father's sacrifice like a badge of honor. "The network is operating at 112% efficiency." Jake smiled at the title, Guardian Prime. It wasn't something he had chosen, but it was what the galaxy had started calling him after he became the first to merge with the Nexus Core. There were now over 300 Guardian-enhanced humans scattered across the galaxy, each one monitoring their assigned sectors and protecting billions of lives through the network. Jake could sense his fellow Guardians. Dr. Lisa Park was exploring ancient ruins in the Andromeda approach, searching for more architect technologies. Commander Tony Rodriguez, who had somehow survived his battle with the Void Hunters, was helping the Crystalline Resonance establish new colonies in previously unexplored regions of space. But the galaxy was not just safer, it was thriving in ways no one had expected on Earth. President Alex Carter stood in his office overlooking the rebuilt cities that now gleamed with technology that seemed like magic. The Guardians had shared architect knowledge freely, advancing human civilization by thousands of years, almost overnight. Diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries were now easily cured. Poverty was ending as new technologies created abundance from basic matter. "The monthly reports are in," his aide informed him. "Colony ship construction is ahead of schedule. We'll have 1 million humans living in other galaxies within the next decade." Carter nodded, but his attention was focused on the memorial wall that covered one side of his office. It contained the names and pictures of every human who had sacrificed themselves in the purification. Over 8,000 men and women who had given their lives so that strangers across the galaxy could live free from darkness. Betty Collins, the grandmother who had lost her grandson Peter in the purification, now worked at the Guardian Memorial Center. Every day, beings from dozens of different species came to pay their respects to the humans who had saved their worlds. She had seen Zephyrian warriors weep before Peter's picture. Crystalline resonance sing beautiful harmonies in honor of the volunteers. "They remember," she told visitors who came to learn about the sacrifice. "Every being in the galaxy whose life was saved knows the names of our people. They teach their children about the humans who chose to become guardians instead of staying safe on their own world." Changes went far beyond simple gratitude. The Galactic Federation had been reorganized as the Galactic Alliance, with Earth serving as its spiritual center. But unlike the old Federation, which had been dominated by the most powerful species, the Alliance gave equal voice to every world, no matter how small or remote. Admiral Kira Veltar, whose blue-skinned Andorian people had once ruled the galaxy, now worked closely with human guardians to coordinate relief efforts and exploration missions. She had been one of the first to accept humanity's new role, understanding that the Guardians weren't conquerors, but protectors. "The humans have given us something we never had before," she explained to a gathering of Alliance leaders. "They gave us Guardians who have no interest in political power or personal gain. They exist only to protect life and preserve the connections between our worlds." The warrior Zephyrians had adopted human volunteers into their battle clans, considering them reborn ancestors who had transcended death itself. Emperor Thane himself had declared that any human was welcome in Zephyrian space as honored family members. Even more remarkable were the changes in species that had never gotten along before. The proud hegemony worlds, which had refused to join the old Federation, now worked peacefully with their former enemies. The Guardians somehow made cooperation feel natural, their presence in the network creating understanding where there had once been only suspicion and fear. But the most amazing changes were happening in the far reaches of space, where new discoveries were being made almost daily. Dr. Park materialized in an ancient architect facility on the edge of known space. Her enhanced senses reading technologies that had been dormant for millions of years. She was no longer entirely the woman who had started this journey 5 years ago. Her consciousness now spanned multiple dimensions, allowing her to perceive the galaxy's history as if it were a book she could read. "Jake, you need to see this," she called through the network. Instantly, Jake's awareness joined hers in the ancient facility. What they found there made both of them pause in wonder. The facility contained not just architect technology, but evidence of other civilizations that had faced the same dark matter threat across multiple galaxies. "We're not alone," Lisa said, as she studied the records. "There are guardians in other galaxies, too." The architects left children scattered across the universe, all sleeping until they were needed. Through the quantum communicators, they detected signals from distant galaxies where other enhanced beings were fighting their own battles against the darkness. Humanity wasn't unique in their sacrifice. They were part of a vast network of guardian species that protected life wherever it appeared. But even more exciting was what they found in the deepest vaults of the facility. Ships, vessels designed by the architects to travel not just between stars, but between galaxies. The technology to explore the infinite universe was finally within reach. Back on Earth, children played in parks under the warm sun, laughing as they chased each other through gardens that bloomed with flowers from a dozen different worlds. Were the first generation to grow up knowing that the darkness between the stars was not empty and hostile, but filled with guardians who watched over them with love. In schools across human space, teachers told the story of the Great Purification. They taught children about the volunteers who had become something more than human, so that others could remain safely human. They learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite fear when others needed help. Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of a new ship, one designed with both human and architect technology. Through the windows, he could see the construction of humanity's first intergalactic vessel. Soon, humans would travel to other galaxies, carrying the Guardian network with them, and offering protection to civilizations that were still fighting their own battles against the dark. "Are you ready for the next journey?" Lisa asked, her consciousness joining his on the observation deck. Jake thought about the volunteers who had given their lives 5 years ago. He could still sense them in the network, their spirits woven into the fabric of galactic civilization. They had answered the call when the galaxy was failing, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful that would last forever. "The galaxy was failing," he said quietly. "But Earth answered the call, and now it's time to answer the call of the universe." As the first intergalactic ship prepared for launch, carrying enhanced humans to distant galaxies were new adventures, and new threats waited. The conduit network pulsed with the warm energy of human souls, who had chosen to become guardians of all life. The darkness would always exist in the spaces between realities. But wherever life appeared in the universe, it would find protectors who understood that the greatest strength came not from power or technology, but from the willingness to sacrifice everything for strangers who might never even know their names. The galaxy was no longer failing, it was thriving, protected by the love of a species that had learned the most important lesson in the universe: that answering the call to help others was what made any being truly alive.